they're representing that country, and this narrative is huge for them to claim and to hold onto. So it takes a while before they start dismantling and start sort of thinking about it in a different way. And I don't think they ever sort of accept totally the other's narrative, but they start acknowledging that there are more than one discourse. There's more than one story to this. And that's, I think, a beginning. It's not about saying, okay, yours is right, but saying, okay, there are probably multiple ways of looking at it. But it's very hard for them, because for them, history, the way they're taught, is the truth. And so a lot of times when they come together, they ask the facilitators, then what is the truth? What should we really believe? What really happened? And do we really know? I mean, it is subjective, when you look at even textbooks, the subjective representations of those who are writing it, there's an intention behind it. And so it's complicated. And it's hard for those students who are exposed to singular narrative to start complexifying this whole discourse. So I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I want to share with you a model that I've been thinking about, and just trying to see how to break this singular narratives. And I call it the snail model just because of the way it looks like. But the idea is that starting with the self, just like I did with you in some ways, about what do you know? What do you know? What's your connection with this event? What do you know about it? And when people come from countries where they are already engaged in that conflict, they have much more than your group about the partition, but they have much more about the personal connection to that discourse because of the collective memory that comes into play, what they've heard in their families, the social discourses. So we start with what's your connection. Then we begin to look at textbooks. And even in the textbooks in the same country, there are differences in how a particular event is taught. So just bringing in the different textbooks, and if we can have access to textbooks for different narratives, even better. But this is a time when they begin to see what is it that I'm being taught, and how does that impact how I think about this issue or about the other. Primary sources, as you noticed, in none of these lessons there were any primary sources. Okay? So there was no documentation, no documents that students could use to actually begin to look at their interpretation or begin to create their own narrative. There was nothing for them. It was an interpretation that was given to them. So they would then get some primary sources here and begin to start seeing, this is what I have, and this is probably what's missing in this discourse. But then we move to oral histories. A lot of you mentioned that none of the books really talked about what happened to the people. Right? Some of them, I have to say, do talk about numbers. How many millions died, how many millions were displaced. Nothing more than that. Because when you start getting into that discourse in the textbook, then somebody is going to take on the role of the perpetrator, and somebody is going to take on the role of the victim, and how are you going to make those decisions on who does that, right? And so again, even if they were going to be doing it, the danger is it might get singular, right? But the rationale that most of the textbook writers have presented about not including this is that they don't want children to be exposed to sort of these harsh, cruel things that are sort of inhumane. That's the rationale. Okay. We move on then to the social political discourse, because the learning of any historical events, especially events that are around conflict, and which are these long, protracted conflicts, are not just learned through history textbooks, not just learned through this classroom or in the school. There's a lot of education happening outside, right? It's happening in the films, the movies, it's happening through newspapers, it's happening through the media now, social media as well. So there are all of this information that the student is exposed to, which is also either perpetuating or even sometimes even questioning the discourses that they are exposed to. And I have to say, in the region now, in South Asia, in India and Pakistan, there are a lot of alternative discourses coming up, which are really about peace. But those are not the ones that are very widely used or widely even known about. Okay? And then they would do a place-based inquiry. And what I mean by place-based inquiry is, when you really go and get in touch with the place where that happens, so there's a border there, and if you get time, I'd like to encourage you to look at a BBC excerpt on the Wagah border, Wagah. It's the border between Lahore and India. And every evening, they have a guard-changing ceremony between the borders. And the soldiers on both sides do this dance. It's a very well orchestrated, choreographed performance, at least, but they don't show, they show it as though they have a lot of animosity, but if you look at it, as an artist, you can tell there's more to this happening. They've choreographed it together. And every evening, thousands of people collect on both sides of the border, cheering their own countries to really, the guards should be higher and their flag should be higher, and it's sort of this jingoism on both sides of the border every single evening. And taking people to that border to really say, what does that really mean? This is the border people crossed, right? 47. Is this the way we remember it? And so I really think that the place-based inquiry would have a big impact on how people begin to make a connection personally to an event and start unpacking. And maybe in your own histories, you have places that you think, I want to take my students, I want to go there and find out more through that connection. And then lastly, asking the students to really write a new narrative after they've been through this whole process of all those multiple lenses. You've exposed them to those different discourses, and then you say, now what do you think about this? And if we had more time, what I would do is, and if we do have time later to do, is to take these 4 narratives and see if we can come up with something. One narrative that kind of acknowledges, but also provides some kind of opening somewhere. And so I'm going to leave you with a question, and my question to you would be, you mentioned some of the questions you already had that were not provided by this particular lesson. And I've shared with you a frame that I'm hoping to begin to use. What I'd like you to know from you is, do you think there could be something else I could add to this frame to make